Great that you can join us today. I'm really looking forward to it's another sort of excellent discussion on all issues associated with supply chain. My name is Duncan Brock. I'm a leader of the leadership team within SIPS, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. You can just about see our logo behind me, and delighted to have the chance to host this discussion. We cover a different topic every week, and my colleague Sam from the MENA office hosted last week's session, which was about supply chain disruption. And very much this week, we want to focus on a specific area of cybersecurity risks in the supply chain, something that we know is a growing issue all the way through and is becoming more of a discussion topic and also a focus for lots of organizations. And I'm going to have three guests who's going to join me through this discussion to sort of bring to life the topic of cyber risk in the supply chain. So it's great to have you all with us. For those of you who haven't joined one of these supply chain talks before, you have an option to join us by chat. I think I've already seen our supply chain elf has put some comments within the chat. So if you want to add any comments or say hello or add any variety in the views in there, please do so. We're delighted to see people add views. And James, welcome to you. Hello to you. And also, if you have any specific questions that you'd like to raise, you'd like me to raise really with the guests we've got, please do put them in the Q&A because that way I've got a better chance to actually sort of pick them off the Q&A and ask them of the guests that we've got with us today. So please participate. It's really good if you get a chance to do so because it brings it to life for us as well. It gives us a bit of variety to the discussion. So please do participate as you do. So as I said, what we've got to do is focus today on cyber risk in the supply chain. And we're going to do it really in two halves. We're going to have one half, which is focusing on a news story, a broader topic on cyber risk. And then we're going to drop into some more specific tactics and issues and focuses that we've got within the supply chain itself. But before we get to the news story and really that sort of broader focus, I'd like to bring the first guest on. He is Mark Bromley. And actually, Mark, as he turns on his camera and joins us, he's joining us from Singapore. And delighted to have you with us, Mark. It's, I think, now just past 11 p.m. in the evening for you. So I'm really delighted the dedication you've got for joining us in this session. So welcome to you. Mark's been with MasterCard and working out, as I said, Singapore for 4.5 years. And a broader experience, I think, in procurement and supply chain, and then just recently moved into a new role. So maybe, Mark, maybe quick intro to yourself, and then we can get on and sort of share the discussion around the story itself. So, Mark, over to you.
Hi, Duncan. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Welcome.
Firstly, thank you for inviting me to Supply Chain Talk. I'm honoured to be part of this discussion. Looking forward to the to the conversation. So, yeah, thank you for the warm intro. It is very late in Singapore, but privileged to be on the call. As Duncan mentioned, Mark Bromley from MasterCard, currently based in Singapore. I started a new role on the 1st of October. I'm now Director for Business Development for our cyber and product services in Asia Pacific. Prior to that, I've been in procurement and supply chain for about 15, 16 years. That's really my background. I've worked at American Express, Network Rail, Barclays Bank. I've lived in Singapore working for Barclays for a number of years, as you've mentioned. So my background and kind of core skills sit in supply chain and procurement. And I've kind of moved to the other side of the table to go onto the business development side, looking at MasterCard's cyber products and services.
That's great, Mark. And I think, as we go through this, we'll want to pick probably both sides of your career there, both the procurement experience, but also, I suppose, some of these services that people like MasterCard can provide to help people in this area. So it's great that you're joining us. And I want to bring up the sort of an article that we're going to use as a bit of a focal point for the first half of this discussion, which is around the issue of, I suppose, risks in the supply chain that's been coming through. And I know sort of we just posted that in the chat here in terms of the item itself. But when you read through the article, and it's probably something that Mark you'll see all the time, is the fact that a lot of organizations now are facing major issues within cyber risk, that there's a lot of them are seeing breaches down through their supply chain. And I think most of them are saying we've had a problem at some point. But then I think what they're going on to say is, is it getting worse? And we'll probably pick that up. But also trying to increase the budget that they've got to invest in preventative measures and views of what they could do differently to protect themselves of the issues down through the supply chain itself. So clearly, a lot more organizations now taking this seriously and needing to do so. And maybe that's part of why your role in MasterCard has changed as well. So, but what's your view? What's your take on this in terms of I suppose, the prevalence of issues in the supply chain, and also what organizations are trying to do about it?
Yeah, I mean, this is a issue that affects every organization, and it affects us as consumers and customers and in our everyday lives. Cybercrime is a $350 billion problem worldwide, and that is growing. It has huge impact. Around 50% of businesses are just not prepared for cyber attacks. So when it happens, people generally just do not have the infrastructure or the ability to stop it. And by that point, it's too late. If we look at some high-level cases that's happened, just companies and brands, and LinkedIn this year, 700 million users on LinkedIn. You and I, Duncan, and probably most people on this call probably have a LinkedIn account, and hopefully weren't affected. But LinkedIn was one of those companies. Adult Friend Finder, I know it's a very odd example, but 412 million accounts a few years back. People that were using that. That's not the kind of thing you want your information to kind of be out there in the ecosystem, right? Especially if you're someone that's come from families and backgrounds. So just the point of that is that even those types of companies and organizations have had issues. Florida's water supply was hacked, whereby sodium hydroxide levels were increased into the water system. That's the cybercrime that's happening and affecting people's home in terms of the tap water and the water they wash their families in and everything else. And Colonial Pipeline quite recently, had a disrupted fuel deliveries in 12 states, affecting millions of people in the US. So these are just some examples, and there's many, many, many more. So it shows you that across all types of geographies, sectors, no one is necessarily safe.
And I suppose, in a way, that's what, the bigger picture, which is, as you say, those visible examples. But I think what was surprising to me when I read through the article was that it was like everyone who surveyed said we've had a problem. And we see some that are in the public domain, which are the ones you quoted. But I think what was surprising to me was that everyone's saying we have had a problem at some point in time, and maybe we're not seeing those. We're not. Are people therefore taking it seriously enough? Because clearly this is happening all the time.
Yeah, and look, we're living in a very connected world these days, just through 5G that's obviously coming, the Internet of Things, hyperconnectivity. So a lot of the breaches that happen in the supply chain, are coming from third parties. I think something like 40% of breaches come from the supply chain. So anyone that is working in or has a supply chain, knowing and making sure that your suppliers and your tier ones, tier twos, and tier threes. I know it's a difficult thing to solve for, but just try and create that resiliency and understanding of how safe and how well protected are your suppliers. Because at the end of the day, that impact could be a tier 4 business that impacts all the way up to yourselves. So, I think for everyone, it's in our own best interest to really try to. I know we can't always foresee the future and we can't always be 100% protected, but maybe just providing and trying to do more. It's like having insurance in our own lives. We have insurance, health insurance, or medical insurance, because in the event of something happening, we're okay. I think cyber is not too dissimilar in that regard for companies.
So the stat you quoted there was 40% of breaches occur in the supply chain. I mean, probably for any big organization, there's probably a lot of effort going in within their own security and protection. But that's a high number of breaches going down through the supply chain. And you also said, I think, there that while people may see maybe a tier one they might focus on, but a lot of these could well be happening tiers 2, 3, and 4, where maybe they just don't have that visibility that they probably need.
Yeah, I think it's something like average companies average around 47 tools or products that solve for some kind of cyber kind of protection or third-party risk type monitoring. 47 tools. There's a lot of tools and products out there. Having 47 tools does not mean that you're not open or will be, at risk. But to your point, Duncan, I think everyone needs to just start looking deeper. It's above and beyond your own infrastructure. It is trying to understand, when you outsource anything, when your facilities management business is getting in catering companies and other companies within tier 2, again, I know it's hard to solve for. You just need to try to understand, or make sure at least, the businesses you're working with have some kind of protection or coverage, or at least giving you some security. The average cost of a data breach is around $3 million.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of money. If you're a Microsoft or a MasterCard or someone like that, okay, that's maybe not a lot of money, but to most businesses, yeah, that's going to have a significant impact on you.
Yeah. I mean, I work for an procurement institute, and I know we've had exactly the same discussions. And we were a smaller organisation. I mean, $3 million or £3 million to us would be a significant hit for our organisation and stop us doing some of the other things that we'd like to do. So, it's scary numbers of that size. And I know that I think Supply Chain Elf has just posted some of the sort of information about MasterCard in there. So, but I mean, you talked about 47 tools there.
Yeah.
Often, sometimes it's difficult for us to know which ones to choose. Where do you put your investment?
Yeah.
Which ones are the ones that will give you the best level of protection?
There's a lot of tools, as we said. I mean, just obviously, just talking very quickly about MasterCard. We have acquired a number of businesses in the cyberspace. I think about 6 acquisitions in the past 3 to 4 years. All have different cyber products and services that we believe are best in class, or at least the leading edge when it comes to where they stand. And what we're trying to do is not just solve for MasterCard's own security in our the 60 million merchants and 20,000 banks that MasterCard supports. We're also trying to solve for anyone that is in their own ecosystem. Small and medium-sized businesses. MasterCard Trust Center is something we're trying to build up to support small businesses in the US, independent stores, high street stores, gas stations, anyone that has a point of sale terminal, anyone that has any transactions, anyone that's digital, you could be hacked, you could be swiped by a dodgy card, you could be infiltrated by someone just, going into your infrastructure. So we're trying to solve for not just huge corporates, but for small businesses as well, and giving them access, cost effective. I know that's an issue as well. People think it's expensive. I can't afford to spend that much money on something which probably won't happen to me. Completely understand it. But again, we are trying to offer and give not just large corporates, but small businesses access to those products and services.
And I think it's something I'd like to come back to a bit later in this discussion, Mark, about the sort of things that people can do. And you've highlighted a few there. But maybe it's a good opportunity to bring our other sort of 2 guests in that we've got for this Supply Chain Talk. And delighted to sort of bring in sort of Sam De Silva, who's a partner with a legal company, and I know has had a real interest in this area for a long period of time. And also Dr. Abhijit Gaji, who wants to be known as Abby as we go through. And the 2 of them will join us. And he's Cranfield University. And we'll give them both a quick opportunity to talk you through. But now we've got sort of someone from a legal perspective, and also from a teaching academic perspective, and some research that's gone into this area. Maybe Sam, sort of quick intro to you. Just tell us a bit about your background.
Yeah, sure, Duncan. So, yeah, I'm a commercial technology and data cyber partner at at an international law firm called CMS. So I advise both customers and suppliers on commercial contracts, supply chain risks, and so forth. And I've had a long, as Duncan knows, long association with SIPS. I used to be a board member of SIPS a while ago, and yeah, obviously still keep in touch with SIPS friends.
Thank you, Sam. When he said he was a board member, that meant he sit on a board and asking me difficult questions about what I was doing in SIPS at the time. Is that right?
Not difficult question. They're easy, Duncan.
Oh, that's right. But welcome to you, Sam. Sam's always been a great contributor to us in terms of bringing that sort of legal perspective and insight to us when we're looking at issues in procurement and supply. So welcome to you, Sam. And Abby, do you want to sort of quick introduction to yourself?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Duncan, for inviting me to this event. Myself, Abhigaj, I'm the associate professor in supply chain management, and my particularly research interest or consultancy interest are in supply chain risk management and the resilience part of it. So I have been recently looking at emerging risks, particularly such as cyber risk, climate change risk, counterfeit risk, which are really becoming very prominent in supply chain context, and that's where my interest lies. Thank you.
That's great, and welcome to you both. And maybe Abby, just building on that point there in terms of the research or the insights that you're providing, maybe sort of bring that to life to us in this sort of broader perspective of what's going on in this area and what are people trying to do. So give us your perspective.
So essentially, like as we know, cyber risk is a growing challenge, but then we definitely need to understand like what are the different sources of those cyber risks, because they can come from multi sources, and identifying them could be quite helpful, especially for the new businesses or the small medium enterprises, just to even be aware like what are the sources for it, or point of penetrations, for example, or even the level of propagation. So how does it actually starts from a firm level and then starts to propagate across the supply chain and to the wider ecosystem, could be quite a useful understanding. But at the same time, the understanding of possible mitigation strategies, like what are the best available tools within the supply chain or strategies within the supply chain, which can really benefit to reduce possibly or maybe control these kind of risks within the cyber domain. And I'm thinking about what all like organizations or structures needs to bring together to make what we call it as like a cyber secure resilient environment moving forward. So that's where I have been particularly keen looking at, and have done some research in this domain, which I will be happy to share as we go along. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll come back to you on that. So thank you. But I think the more, I mean, a bit like Mark was saying a bit earlier, the more insight we get, the more information we get, the more views of what we can do will help everybody. I think that often maybe we need to talk about this more, because clearly it's a major issue as we go through. I mean, and Sam, from your perspective, I mean, you say it's been a sort of focal area for you. What's your take on this broader challenge of cyber risk down through the supply chain, and what organizations need to be doing more about?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I think the whole supply chain has become much more complicated. So, traditionally, if you look at 5, 10, 15 years ago, it was basically service provider, supplier, customer, yeah? And, you've got a sort of a one-to-one relationship, and you can manage the risk in the contract there to a certain extent. But now, because of the digital transformation and the different sort of elements of a particular solution or product, as you mentioned, Duncan, there's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers. So I think one thing which organizations aren't doing enough of, but perhaps the larger ones are, but even then I think there's more that can be done, is the due diligence prior to getting to contract signature. They're not actually looking at what the supply chain is, who are the parties involved and so forth. They just assume it's, they're dealing with supplier A and that's it. And then when they come to the contracting, when they look at the subcontracting clauses, supplier goes, oh no, we need to be entitled to, subcontract to suppliers B, C, D, and E. And then the customer's like, oh, we didn't even know that was happening. So, I think at that stage it's probably too late. All that needs to be done up front, I think. So that would be sort of a lesson learned, I think, or a tip, is actually do the due diligence properly and make it a robust process before actually selecting the suppliers.
And I think that's really good advice. I think part of the challenge we've got, and maybe this comes back to what Mark was saying a bit earlier, is all the incumbent suppliers that we're currently dealing with, who are currently there within the supply chain. Going back and doing due diligence after the event is probably more difficult. But I think you're absolutely right. Is asking the right questions and maybe knowing which questions to ask, which is probably where we need to maybe provide a bit more advice to people.
Yeah. It's like one of those things, you don't know what you don't know. So yeah. And also, I guess, asking the right sort of bespoke question. So there's no point, sending a 50, 100-page due diligence questionnaire to a small SME, because they're just going to bulk at that. So it needs to be tailored to the particular supplier and to the particular service and supply. Some services and supply are, naturally less risky than others. So, it needs, I don't think it's a sort of basically a one solution fits all. I think it needs to be quite bespoke.
Yeah, that's true. And Abby, maybe come back to you. And you said you got some insights. Do you want to share some of the insights that you're getting from the work you're doing?
Yes. So basically, when we looked at different sources of cyber risks, we came up with 5 typical areas broadly as sort of sources of cyber risks. And if I could go through them just quickly, some of them are typically coming as part of the physical threat, the deliberate or natural damage to the infrastructure. It could be like shutting down of your data centers, leading to the whole closure of the business opportunities. So that could be one nature of physical threat, or it could be like just the overload on the systems, like particularly what we see on Cyber Mondays or Black Fridays, where there is just systems are not able to really cope up with those kind of demand, and the firewall simply breaks down. So that is another type of source through which the cyber risks can easily happen. The conventional one, which we commonly know, is typically the like denial of service through the password sniffing, or like typical attacks to the viruses. But then I think what is becoming more and more important and critical nowadays is that the malwares or the cyber attackers are not really trying to get through the direct attack, but through the indirect attack, where they tend to utilize the behind the screen kind of resources to get into the system, and then obviously ask for huge sums of ransom, or similarly trying to really take your intellectual property related information, which is also an important source of cyber risks. And the fifth one, which we tend to typically neglect or do not really focus upon, is the insider threat, where the natural carelessness or the lack of awareness and the intentions of the employees within the organization, like just leaving your password, or giving access unknowingly to the competitors, can be actually fatal in some cases of cyber attacks as well. So usually when we think about cyber attacks, we always think about like a virus attack or maybe like a malware attack, but then as you can see, there are multiple sources through which the cyber attack can really take place. So these are the initial some of the findings, and we have been trying to build more on these kind of things, just looking at like what are the typical point of penetrations, where does the cyber security risk really tries to like get into at the first place, and how does it really propagates. And if I could continue on looking at the propagation part of it, we have always seen that like a lot of small medium enterprises are very unwilling to really share the cyber attacks or cyber threats within their domain. But then the consequent impact of it is already immediately felt on the wider supply chain network. And it doesn't have to be only small, medium enterprises. It could be large organizations as well, where it starts to impact in terms of the information, the services, or the product flow in several cases. And we have started seeing that it does not has to impact only digital supply chains. It can also impact the conventional supply chain. And we have seen latest oil and gas incidents in US to really reflect on that implications. And going beyond, like we always think that, yeah, the cyber risks are only limited to the supply chain and the supply chains get impacted. But what we have observed is like it actually starts to propagate beyond supply chains to the wider ecosystem. For example, take the example of NHS as a healthcare supply chain. We clearly saw that the malicious attack actually led to denial of appointments, and the booking and the privacy of the some of the patients was really at risk, which clearly are not very much fundamental part of the supply chain, stakeholder activity, but still you can see that those impacts can actually propagate to the wider environment or ecosystem, as we may call it.
Yeah, no, that's really good insights, Abby, and probably, I mean, there's 2 or 3 questions that have come through on the Q&A, so I'll maybe start with a couple of those. And one from John Richards, so thank you, John. Says, do you share your threat assessments and your risk profile with your suppliers? So I suppose that sort of comes to your point, Abby, and maybe sort of where Sam and Mark are coming from. You know, if you know where the problems are, do you actually go to your suppliers and have that conversation with them and share where you think the threat assessments and risk profiles are? I'm going to open that up. I mean, Mark, Sam, what's your view on that?
Yeah, I think it needs to be balanced in terms of, sharing sufficient information, but not exposing yourself to sort of liability, so it needs to be quite balanced in terms, and it's quite a hard balance to strike, actually, because you don't want to be open yourself up to third-party claims or something like that. So say, for example, you say we've got this particular vulnerability open, and then you've got a contractual obligation to another third party that's saying that we've got robust processes in place. If that third party finds that you've got a vulnerability, you're potentially in breach of that contract. So it's not an easy one, but it needs to be managed quite carefully, I think.
Right. Mark, your view on that?
Yeah, I think that sounds like a good point. There's a lot of products and tools out there that do a lot of scoring on your supply chain, and they'll tell you, are they in a kind of a healthy state? They might score out of 100. They might give you a traffic light system. Some of the information might be on the news that you might read when you're having a morning coffee. Some of it might be harder to uncover, but some of these products and tools can give you that transparency. I think when you have that information, it's then how do you communicate that back to your supplier or your partner, and how do you have those kind of conversations at the right level and understanding what that threat and risk might be. I think the SolarWinds example is a great example of what happens when you don't know your supply chain and the impact that can have. It doesn't mean that if you have some of these products and tools that you'll know everything about all your suppliers, but I think it will certainly help you to at least give you some intelligence and information that's slightly more proactive than reactive. You're not finding out when you pick up the news and it's on BBC News. You might have some proactive activity around your vendor management or your relationship management groups that can help you to give you some of this intelligence.
Right. So I think you're both saying, yes, you should share, but it's balanced in terms of what you're seeing. But I suppose it also then links to, excuse me, another question which I think is coming from Trudy about. She says, I can see why some businesses would like to hide any attacks in their business in case it spooks investors. So should businesses be forced by legislation to reveal what's happened to everyone so that you can all learn more and be more forewarned? So it's back to this issue of, I think, Abby, you raised the point of people hiding stuff.
Right.
How do you get people to share their own exposure, their own issues, and learn from the challenges that's going on through the supply chain?
True. So, I mean, we have to see cyber risk as any kind of risk what you face in supply chains, and we are obviously going to then face the implications of it in terms of maybe huge cost, possibly delays, poor customer service. But we have to look at the bigger picture, and it's going to be reputational damage or impact on share market are the implications. So, we have to be a bit more holistic in terms of thinking rather than being, looking at only short-term objective of trying to save few millions of pounds or probably avoid some of the awareness which others might come to know and might start looking you down. So the whole point here is bringing more awareness about it to the wider network so that then they can better manage. And we have to see it as a bigger system rather than just a firm level issue, because invariably it is going to impact and start cascading to the wider system. So from my perspective, I think it's always better to bring, share the information. Obviously, that level of sharing of information could vary depending upon the other legal and financial implications could be. But then I personally believe that as part of the supply chain network, it's always better to share because you are likely to benefit in a holistic perspective.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we'd all say, yes, you should. I suppose the question is, if people won't share, how do you get the information? How do you know whether or not there has been a breach or a challenge or an exposure there? And I suppose that's the nub of the question here is how do you encourage people to share these issues when they come up?
I mean, this is a general issue, isn't it? Like, it's up to individuals, like whether they want to share the information. So the only way which you could encourage is to make that awareness that it is going to have a bigger implication, and it's always best to share in the interest of supply chain stakeholder, supply chain network objective. It's all about trying to really optimize the whole processes. And if you've got these bottlenecks in terms of cyber attacks, it's always going to have an implication. So it's a difficult question, to be very honest. And like, how do you really bring people to share about it? But there are multiple ways through which you could possibly identify that has something gone wrong, like unavailability of service, for example, or implications in terms of customer service, or like unavailability of products, are clear indications that something has gone wrong. It does not necessarily mean that it has only come because of the cyber risk, but that could be one of the primary reasons. Especially, we are currently living in a cyber environment where lots of systems, lots of networks are connected together, and that could be one of the likely reasons for it.
Yeah.
Duncan.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Duncan, I mean, the financial risk is, financial implications are obviously very, very important, but brand reputation in this day and age, if a company finds itself in the news because something happened to them, or their users or their data has leaked or been breached, the brand reputation and the impact to your brand is huge in this day and age. You can literally lose millions of customers overnight. People can just walk away and just go to your competitor or their competitor because of digital age that we're in today. So it's a huge, the whole point on, something's happened to us, who do we tell? Do we tell our suppliers? Do we tell our shareholders? Do we tell our investors? I'm sure there's many cases that we know. There's many cases where, people try to keep a tight lid on what's actually been shared, or at least the true impact of what's actually happened. I completely get it, because I think for a lot of businesses, especially some of the bigger businesses, the brand impact that this can have on you can be absolutely huge.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Sam, you're going to come in there, I think.
Yeah, so I think just looking at Trudy's question, there is to a certain extent already legislation in place. So, GDPR, I'm sure you're sick of hearing that 4-letter word, it has got mandatory reporting. So not all cyber breaches will be related to personal data, but the majority is. So if there is a data protection breach and that does cause significant harm to individuals, there is a statutory obligation for that organization, the data controller, to report it to the ICO. ICO will do a report and so forth. So there is legislation to a certain subset of cyber breaches where they are forced to effectively disclose that breach.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. But actually, there's a comment that's come in from Benjamin Davies. So, Davies, thank you to Benjamin, which is saying sharing cyber risk attacks is all but impossible for security teams. The potentially huge impact on organizations' reputation from unwanted disclosure. So I suppose that's, we've got this. We probably all had those discussions within our own organizations. What do you tell people? Because I think your point about reputational risk and the impact on that, and Mark, at the top of the show, you talked about the ones that are visible, and we all know about those, about the companies involved and the impact of them. So people will try and maybe just keep it to themselves, but we all need to learn. And I think you're all saying it's a difficult balance here. It's very difficult to try and balance the sharing of knowledge and the insights with the impact on your own organizations.
Yeah, I mean, spending in security and cyber is going up. More businesses are spending more money to protect themselves, but the number of incidents is going up. So just because we're spending more and people are spending more, it doesn't mean that the problem goes away. Incidents are on the increase, and to some of the points earlier, they're becoming more sophisticated. Who they're attacking, how they're attacking you, the various ways that they can infiltrate and come in. So, it's certainly a growing issue, and it's not going away.
And I mean, one of the points that we probably wanted to come through this discussion is it's a growing issue. And has that issue grown as we've gone more digital, as we've all sort of moved a lot more into this type of environment and more digitally connected across all the suppliers and supply chain? I mean, are we at greater risk now than we were maybe sort of 18 months, 2 years ago? I mean, that's probably an open question to all three of you.
Absolutely, I would agree to that one, because what has happened is over the especially particularly over the last 2 years, like lots of businesses have started to invest in digital transformation projects, and clearly they are bringing in lots of new IoT devices without really having a full visibility in terms of the security aspects of it. So obviously they bring lots of benefits, but then are they really secure when you connect to the network? And these are the teething challenges which probably have not been fully addressed. And we are also bringing lots of other, not just the technology part of it, but we are also trying to bring different business models, which again probably not everybody is fully aware of it, which also adds to the increasing challenges associated with. So clearly, yes, it has increased, and it is likely to increase. That we are likely to go more and more digital in the future, with every step and every activity. So this is going to be a growing challenge, definitely.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the digital age and where we're going in terms of innovation and technology, Internet of Things, a more connected world, 5G, it's just going to become easier maybe in a way for some of these, cyber criminals to, I think, find ways and means to using our mobile phones, online banking, through our own infrastructure. There's just many more ways that I think are going to happen.
I think it probably, I'll ask you, Sam, but I think the question from John Richards is, how much has working from home increased cyber-related attacks? Now, I think you probably both answered that actually we are probably more exposed because of the nature of where we work and how we work now, and maybe less protection than if we're all sort of sat in an office.
I agree, although you could argue the other way and say it's the not cyber risk, but sort of security risk could be sort of may have improved from working from home. Because if you remember the days when we all worked from the office and we print out a whole lot of document, take it on the train, leave it on the train and leave it on in a taxi, those days are now long and far going, because people don't print. They're working from home, they're not commuting that much. So you could argue to a certain extent security risks, not cyber risks, have reduced. The other thing I would sort of add is the whole sort of nature of agile sort of procurement and the fast moving business makes things that get done much quicker. So that means that people just haven't got the thinking time or the time to actually do the investigation or the due diligence, and that it's just not being factored in because deals are being done in a much shorter time. But there are certain things that just take time. You can't accelerate that. So yeah, unfortunately, it's a bit of a trade-off. Do you get this deal done in a certain time, or you extend the time to get the deal and do things properly?
Yeah, and I think your earlier comment there, Sam, about the due diligence and the need to look at things properly, will slow things down. But I suppose it's the classic procurement and supply chain problem I've had all my years in working in procurement. You always accused of slowing things down to get things done right. And the business always challenges you about that, and that problem's been there forever, hasn't it? It's just this is just another example of it.
It's a really good point Sam brings up, and I think now with fintech startups, the supply chain is evolving. We're not just going back to your kind of huge global MNCs for all of your products and services or your most of your needs. You're at least from a technology company like MasterCard, we're getting a lot of our innovation from small businesses, startup fintechs, and how they work and how quickly we want to speed to market, take our products to market, get in front of our competitors. You're not wanting to onboard someone in 4 months to 6 months. You're not wanting to negotiate an MSA in 6 months. You want to do it in 2 weeks. You want to create process and be efficient to go to market quicker. And I think a lot of companies are finding that challenge. As you said, Duncan, procurement, all you're doing is stopping me from doing what I want to do. I want to get this contract done. And obviously we're there to make sure that we follow the right process and we do it in the best possible way. I think procurement has to find that balance and that blend in order for us to be that value add partner that we all want to be. But also these examples we've discussed of some of these companies and these breaches, if you do not perform the right level of diligence, then you can expose yourself. So speed to market is great. Being first is really cool. Working with innovative small companies, very good. But you just got to be conscious of how you do that.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I'd probably just, moving on to another sort of very important topic here, which we already touched on earlier on. And again, it's a really good question from Benjamin Davies. It says sort of SolarWinds, Colonial, and the others brought not just the third-party service providers into focus, but legitimately raised issues with the fourth and more parties. How are the panel ensuring suppliers are secure? So this is coming into this point of, as you go down through the supply chain, what can you do? How can you start to sort of get that visibility of the challenges down through the supply chain? So again, let's open it up. What can you do? How do you go about doing this?
I can take this. Like we looked at multiple mitigation strategies. Now I'm not going to get into too much technical, but the existing strategies which are there in place, which probably could fit better for the cybersecurity related challenges and mitigation opportunities. We looked at basically from pre-attack and post-attack perspective, because there's something always you can do at a proactive level and some of the things at reactive. And if I could really start, if I could start discussing some of those, probably some of the important ones are the accreditation against the security standards, like the so some kind of a global standardization like ISO standards. Having a cybersecurity standards of accreditation could really benefit. We also need to have like not just the firm level auditing in terms of software and hardware systems infrastructure in place, but also a network wide auditing system, which also can actually benefit in terms of reducing the potential of these cyber attacks. In general, when I talked about organizational issues, we clearly need to bring that risk awareness initiatives in place, not just again at firm level, but wider supply chain, maybe through the training, right kind of support, and bringing awareness, obviously. But then at the same time, we have to be like zero trust. Should have some kind of like a zero trust policy whenever we are bringing anybody like a third party or maybe like supplier within the system. You have to make sure that the system is quite secure enough before they can really start infringing some parts of the activities. So these are some of the conventional proactive mitigation strategies which we can have. Obviously we can't really do much because things have already happened in the post attack or reactive strategies, but then there are always some learnings which we can take from that, like trying to even have a data consistency check to make sure that what has been lost, so you can focus on that and try to obviously overcome those issues, or even like having a scenario planning like incident documentation to build up your understanding about what are our weak points within the supply chain, and trying to be a bit more proactive for the next incidents if it may occur, to be better prepared for it, could be quite a useful mitigation strategy to look forward.
That's great, Abby. Thank you. I mean, and Sam, you probably touched on this earlier about sort of the contractual side of things as well, and making sure that those sort of protections are passed down through the supply chain. I mean, is that part of the preventative method that people need to have?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, well, apart from the due diligence, which we'll probably talk to death about, is the other thing is just mapping what's actually happening with the supply chain. Yeah, you need to know. If you don't have that information, you're not going to manage the risk. Yeah, so you need to know what are the actual suppliers involved, and just because there's a particular supply involved in the supply chain, it doesn't necessarily mean that data's going to them or they're going to have access to a system. They may well be in the supply chain, but they don't have any access to the system or no data's coming, so they're low risk. But what you need to sort of actually ascertain is, where are the data flows, where are the access to your systems, where are the potential vulnerabilities, and you need to know that through the supply chain and map it. And then I think one way to manage that risk is contractually. You could obviously the sort of the, I guess, the draconian approach is telling your supplier you've got the contract, you're ultimately liable for all the supply chain, you're responsible for accidents and emissions and stuff, which, contractually you've got that in the contract, but practically what would that mean? Some of these suppliers, as Mark said, they're not the big tier ones. Yeah. So, if you're suing them, for a couple of hundred, that could wipe them off the planet in the sense. So that's no point having that. So you need to actually do the practical mitigations as well as having the contractual stuff in there.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Mark, I mean, you touched on this earlier as well. I mean, any sort of final thoughts on that in terms of the approaches that organizations can take to sort of really understand where the issues are, but also then how to mitigate them?
Yeah, I think there's a lot more investment in third-party risk teams and individuals, and I'm seeing a lot of companies doing that. They're building up their teams to have much, or try to have more clarity in their own supply chain. And that's one way of doing it. I'm not saying that's the answer, but I'm seeing a lot of that. Mastercard's done that. We've invested in our third-party risk team, hired a lot of people in, trying to really get a lot closer and deeper into who our suppliers are and what they do and what's their supply chain. Like Sam mentioned, supply chain mapping is one way of doing that, really understanding tier 1, 2, 3. Products and services we've acquired a few businesses in this particular space. My new role is all about how can we help take those to market. There are some names. I don't know if I should shamelessly plug some of the products within Mastercard, but if anyone does want to know, then we can absolutely give you some names. But the point is, what we're trying to solve for is not just give those products and services to big corporates, startups, fintechs. We want to give people access, right? We appreciate and understand that some of this is expensive. So trying to find kind of the right subscription models or cost modeling in order for people to be able to have access. Because how are people going to know? You can Google cybercrime or cyber products, and you're probably going to find 10,000 companies and businesses, and you're going to have no clue if they're good or not. So it's complicated, it's confusing, but I think at the end of the day, we have to do something about it, and ignoring it and waiting for it to happen is just not the right way. Trying to build some resiliency and robustness in your own supply chain, procurement teams, your risk teams, that's some way of starting and building some strategies behind that.
Yeah, and I think going back to the article we talked about at the start, I mean that needs budget, doesn't it? I mean, and I think you talked about some of the losses that organisations have when there is a breach, and the significance there, and maybe people need to be putting that business case in a lot stronger to actually sort of show that they need to invest in the people, they need to invest in the tools, the techniques, the systems to be able to do this and protect themselves. And I think you've all sort of shared some great examples there of the sort of things that people need to be doing, but they need to get on with it and probably free up the time and the effort to do the mapping, to make the investments, to look at the tools that are available, because there are problems there, and probably people don't quite know where they are at the moment, do they? So that's a real concern. We're actually out of time. This has flown by. This has been a great discussion, guys. Really appreciate the inputs. There's been quite a lot of chat going on about this mug that I'm supposed to have had in my hands promoting Supply Chain Talk, which I don't think Benjamin knew about. But apparently next week I will have a mug of Supply Chain Talk. And what we're going to do is make sure that every week when we have the best question, we'll then make sure a mug gets on its way to people with Supply Chain Talk sort of emblazoned on it. But on the basis that they are on the way through the supply chain, just taking a bit of time at the moment. But I think Benjamin Davies is probably the one who should receive the mug that will come through to him. So we'll make sure we get that across to you, Benjamin. So thank you for your contributions and for your chat that's gone in around that. But we'll make this a feature going forward to actually just try and encourage the participation of people. So thank you for that. I really do think this has been great. Mark, Sam, Abby, I really do appreciate the input and the time that you've spent and the views and perspectives. It's been great. There's been lots of insights that you've all provided. Mark in particular, for staying up until nearly midnight in Singapore. We really do appreciate that. I think you do deserve to go off and have a drink now. So thank you for that. But for all three of you, really do appreciate the time and the effort for participating. So thank you all, and thanks for the audience for watching and listening and for joining in. Next week, we're going to switch topic. We're going to talk a lot more about supply chain and the talent shortage in supply chain, which probably does come back to some of the breadth of skills that people need nowadays on supply chain, because we just talked about one here and we've already touched on a whole load of others over the last few weeks. So talking about supply chain talent shortage will be a really interesting topic. So guys, thank you again. To another session. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Duncan.
Guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.